I thought about this story because I don't know if anyone saw in the paper that it said one of the greatest beaches to go to around Toronto, around Southern Ontario, is Crystal Beach. Anybody here ever go to Crystal Beach other than my Uncle Sid's kids? Right. For those who don't know, I think it was 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Instead of Jews only going north, they go to Crystal Beach. Up north, yeah, you could be by the water, but Crystal Beach, it was a small town that just exploded with Jews from Southern Ontario and Italians from Buffalo.
Where was it located?
It's on Lake Erie, right across from Buffalo, New York. In fact, they used to have a boat that would go from the dock over to Buffalo. And I thought because of that, I'd like to share because I was thinking about if there's one time in my life that I'd go back to, and I don't know if anyone else has this date, it would be when I was 11 years old in Crystal Beach. It was the most idyllic time. And every June at the end of the year, we'd pack up the car and the dog, and my mom, my dad, my brother and sister and I would go to Crystal Beach. My dad would go back and forth on weekends, and that was our second home. And we had a cottage at 105 Cambridge West, which is about a 10-minute walk to this beautiful white sandy beach. It was a public beach. It cost 5 cents to get on. I mean, on the right, there was the private area where you had some big mansions, mostly wealthy Italians in the building industry, but they were there too. And the great thing about that was the fact it was a time when our family was all together for such a long time. And Crystal Beach not only had this beautiful beach, it had this fabulous amusement park. I don't know if any remember it. And what we do is we go to the beach during the day, and sometimes we go to the park. And I love going to the park. I spend a lot of time on the Kittyland roller coaster. I love that metal roller coaster. And then when I was too big, I moved up to the giant roller coaster, but I was always frightened of the Comet. The Comet was the number 3 wooden roller coaster in North America. Originally, it was the Cyclone. It was the number 1 roller coaster in North America. Maybe I was frightened because some people actually went off the Cyclone and they rebuilt it for the Comet. My sister Karen loved the Comet, but I didn't. Now, I should tell you about my sister Karen. She was the real talent in the family. She was a musician. She did artwork. In fact, she comes home one day, and it's a Thursday. My mom and I are there, and she said she met this guy named Tommy Shannon. Tommy Shannon was the disc jockey at WKBW, and on Saturdays, he did a dance show called Buffalo Bandstand, the American version of Buffalo Bandstand. And my sister Karen somehow showed him some of her artwork because she did portraits. And he invites her to come to the show on Saturdays and do portraits of the stars. And my mother says, no, you're not going alone. So guess who goes as her chaperone? So every Saturday morning we drive to Buffalo, we have lunch, we go to the studio, she does her artwork, and then we drive back to Port Dalhousie where it's the Hop, and we get to be in the dressing room with Chubby Checker and Fats Domino and Bobby Ryan, all these people. And this is where I got the real urge to be involved with television. My sister was a lovely woman. She was bright. But we're driving back one day on the Queenie, and all these cars are coming flashing their lights at her. She doesn't know why. We get to the other side of the bridge, this is the OPP, and she asks them, oh, why are they flashing my lights? Because I'm here and I'm trying to catch, okay. So she didn't understand we were getting the warning that she should not speed. Now, a lot of firsts in Crystal Beach for me. One day I'm sitting there, I'm 11, and I realize, wait a sec, I've got Bobby and Zadie Silverberg, Bobby and Zadie NASIMOK, but it's a Bobby Corbett. Why do I have an extra Bobby? I must be adopted. I find out my dad had been married previously, had 2 kids. His wife had passed away. He had met my mother at the Rhythm Bar in Crystal Beach. I don't know who picked up who, and 3 years later, they were married and had me. Also, it was the fact that the first sort of B&B was across the street from our place. These people had families from Toronto stay there, and when I was in grade 6, Sherry Richmond and her mom and dad came in. Now, Sherry had no time for me at West Prep, but in Crystal Beach, She had time, and that was my first kiss or kisses. And one of the highlights was in Crystal Beach, wrestlers used to live there during the spring, summer, and fall because they could go to Buffalo, Rochester, Hamilton, Toronto. And as I walked down the street towards the beach, which was a 10-minute walk, there was Leering Lee Hennig. So you know he must be a villain if his first name's Leering. So I'm keeping away from this very tall Texan with cauliflower ears until one day his wife says, come over, Lee wants to meet you. She pours me lemonade. I meet this very quiet man who's very nice, who teaches me how to throw a drop kick. And then the next Christmas, or the next November 30th, for my birthday, my dad takes me to wrestling. Lee is wrestling with Fred Atkins against the Bertoya brothers. Of course, they're the villains. And as they're walking down the ramp near me, Lee is cursing and yelling at people, and they're yelling at him, and I go, hey, and he goes, hey, Brian, and then he was a really sweet man, but not in his character. But the thing about Crystal Beach for me was my mom. My mom was like the hostess with the mostest. Anybody from Toronto we knew we'd have over. On Saturday nights, if you wanted to find the OPP after midnight, come to 105 Cambridge West. She was pouring. One morning, she woke us up at 3 o'clock. Her car was stolen. She phoned the boys. They found the car within 30 minutes and brought it to her. And I was lucky because the man who ran the Crystal Beach Music Park, George Hall, my mom were very friendly. Sometimes after the beach, she'd want to go to have a beverage with Uncle George, so he would put me on the crash cars for 40 minutes or an hour, and I'd just run into people, which is where I learned how to drive, which is why I don't. But the thing about Crystal Beach was going to the music park and having that fear of that roller coaster. After Tommy Shannon retired from WKBW, Danny Neverth took over. And Danny and Jungle J. Nelson and another disc jockey were going to set the world roller coaster record on a Sunday. And because our place was very close to the roller coaster, Karen and I offered to bring food in to Dan Neverth. Well, Karen had to go back to Toronto, so I show up at the Comet with this big thermos of soup. And I get there, and there's sort of a break, and Dan lets me go through, and I sit down with him in the front seat, and we're talking as he's drinking the soup. I don't realize the car starts to fill up. And then all of a sudden, I find that we're moving, and we're going up and up and up this steep hill, and I am scared, but I can't joke at Dan Neverth. And when you get to the top, when you're in the front car, you hang over for a little while till more of the cars, and I'm looking at my impending death, and then whoosh, and for 2.5 minutes, I'm screaming. And then we finish, and I go back again 11 times in one day. So I beat that fear. But I went back to Crystal Beach 1985 before it closed. I got my sister some suckers, and I realized that you cannot go back again, but having stories like this, you can always relive those passionate moments. And that was my story about Crystal Beach.